So in the last video, I showed you the relationship grid and I explained why I divorced my husband after 25 years because he was a stonewaller. Stonewalling is one of the four horsemen that the Gottman Institute identified. When they see couples interacting, they can tell with 90-degree certainty, 90% certainty if this couple will get divorced because one of the four horsemen is present in their interaction. Contempt, defensiveness, criticism, or stonewalling. My ex-husband had contempt and stonewalling, so after 25 years, I left him. Now, some men make a fair comment. They've asked me, was he always that way? And I would say, yes, he was. But yes, so I chose him. I take responsibility for choosing him, and I take responsibility for growing and leaving him as well. What happened was that when I first was married, I was maybe a little bit more too submissive, too much of a people pleaser, too much of how can I get this guy to love me? How can I be okay with what's happening? What's wrong with me for feeling this way? How can I deal with feeling this way? How can I cope for being neglected, mistreated? Not mistreated, I'm sorry. How can I cope with being neglected and stonewalled? What is happening? Okay, I'll turn my attention to my kids. And then I developed some unhealthy coping mechanisms as well. So it is not healthy to be in relationships with people who stonewall or avoid because we either have to develop coping mechanisms, and for some people it could be God or the church or their religion. We have to stop growing and we have to subdue our emotional expression and minimize our emotions, which makes us human. We have to become cold to some degree. And I'm going to be honest, I'm sharing a lot of family stuff today. My stepmom has been married to my stonewalling dad for 40 years, and she's an intelligent, very attractive. She's a few years older than me, extremely attractive, very well put together European woman. She has a PhD. She's extremely attractive, very submissive, but she had to give up a lot to be with my dad. And I noticed that about 20 years into their marriage, a big shift occurred in her. She was very sensual and vulnerable, and she had to shut that all off. She had to shut off a big part of herself because he made her. He was so mean, and I would see her cry. And in order for her to be in that relationship, she had to shut off a big part of her humanity. I feel like she's still kind, everybody still loves her, but she had to shut off a big part of who she is as a woman and as a human. And she gets her comfort from God because she can't get any of it from my dad. Now, some of you may think she's the perfect woman. She's putting up with his neglect. She's putting up with his bad treatment. She's putting up with his dismissal of her. So to some of you guys, she's the perfect woman. To the man who doesn't take accountability, a woman like that is perfect, of course. And my dad thinks she's the perfect woman. But my dad can't even get along with any of his own kids. She's all he's got. So, people make their different choices in relationship, but she also had to give up being a mom because he would never let her have more kids because he's too selfish to be involved with kids. And she does admit if we would have had kids, our relationship wouldn't have lasted because he needs all my attention. So she would come home from a very high profile job and get right in the kitchen and he'd be like, bring me tea, make me dinner. And she hates sex. And the reason she hates sex is because he's very cold to her. I'm sure of it. I am sharing a lot more about my family today, but I don't really give a shit anymore because the older I get, the less I give a shit. Nobody knows who these people are. I'm not really throwing them under the bus. I'm just trying to explain things from my own life. And what I'm trying to get to here is all these people saying that it's bad to get divorced. The people saying that have never been married, first of all, because you do not know how much of yourself you have to cast aside, turn off, switch off, neglect, and abandon to deal with a neglectful relationship, let alone an abusive one. And my dad was not nearly as good of a husband, as my ex-husband was. But I had to shut down huge parts of my humanity. And the point I was trying to make is there are women who are willing to do it, like my stepmom. She's very religious and she's kind of a people pleaser. And I think she never discovered her boundaries. I think that she was probably abused by her dad because she thought that kind of treatment was okay. And when I first got married, I thought that kind of treatment was okay because I thought men who show their feelings are losers and wimps. Because my dad never showed his feelings, and men were not supposed to when I was growing up. But I grew in my marriage. During those years, I grew, I matured, and being a mom was a huge source of my growth for me. And I started wanting more from a marriage than what he ever promised me. So really what happened is I changed and he didn't, and that's okay. People are not objects that we own. Relationships are a privilege that we are in, and nobody ever said you can neglect your wife. Your relationships need nurturing. And to the extent that some people don't want to nurture it and another person starts nurturing and wanting more, it's better for them to leave. I will say that being in a relationship with someone who was stonewalling led me to have a number of coping mechanisms which were not good for me. They were not good for me. I was very unhappy. And I think that people deserve to be happy. And here's what I want to say to all these guys who are like, why would you divorce him? I want you to take some fucking accountability, those guys. And women too, we are accountable to how we show up in relationships. We don't own people. And just because we're married to someone doesn't mean that we can just treat them with contempt, stonewall them, and not care how they feel. Because every time I told my ex-husband what I didn't like or something I wanted different, he would just be like, no, Sharzad, I like things the way they are. And basically his way of relating was very infantile. So staying in relationships with people like that is very bad for our emotional health, for our mental health. It's not good. So the way out is people have to keep growing. You can't just be like, well, this is how I am. This is how I am. Because if that's just how you want to be, then find someone who's okay with that. Okay? You have to take some accountability for how you show up. And if you don't want to take accountability for your behavior and how you show up, then don't be with me. Because I don't put up anymore with people who don't care how I feel. I stopped talking to my brother. I stopped talking to my sister a few years after I divorced my ex-husband. Because I got to the point where I was like, I do not want to associate with people who neglect me, are contemptuous of me, stonewall me, and don't care how I feel. That's just it. And that's good. That's healthy.